Good afternoon and welcome to Opioid Toolkit, a professional aid created for understanding the opioid crisis. My name is Sarah Fisher, and my pronouns are she and hers. Just making sure that everyone is muted so that we don't hear the background and we give one mic to one voice. Thank you again. Closed captioning and other accessibility options are available. Let us take a moment for a few housekeeping items. Throughout the session, please feel free to comment and ask questions in the chat. When you do, please make sure to select everyone as your audience. We will be recording this session. We did hit record earlier, and we are super happy that you are here with us today. Land acknowledgements are an honest and historically accurate way to recognize Native communities of this land. Presenting land acknowledgements recognizes histories that have been systematically erased. The Native peoples of this region include the Etowah, Kiowa, Santee, Edisto, Nachikuso, and Wasamasa people. Region 2, Regional Medical Library recognizes the Native communities of the land on which we live, work, and play in Charleston, South Carolina. Next slide, please. Now, a labor acknowledgement recognizes that much of the economic progress and development in a geographic area or industry resulted from the unpaid labor and forced servitude of people of color, specifically people who descended from Africa. Region 2 Regional Medical Library recognizes that the United States was built at the expense of forcefully enslaved Black people. We acknowledge that much of what we know of this country today, including its culture, economic growth, and development, has been made possible by the labor of enslaved African, their descendants, immigrant workers, impoverished people, domestic workers, and others who have endured tragic circumstances for the growth of the country and the privileges enjoyed by few. This history continues the legacies of intergenerational trauma today. We strive to remain mindful and to use our work to support the health and well-being of all people. Next slide, please. Now, community agreements going into today's presentation. We would like to take just a brief moment to set these community agreements. We have some basic rules to set forth and welcome any you would like to add. Please put them in the chat. First, please take care of yourself. Feel free to take a break or hydrate. No one knows everything. Together, we know a lot. So listen to understand. Make space and take space. Be aware of how much you are speaking. If you are speaking a lot, be mindful to make space for those with quieter voices, especially those from marginalized groups. One mic and one voice. Only one person should speak at a time. Speak from your own experiences and do not assume other people's experiences or generalize. Understand the difference between impact and intent. What you are intending is less important than how it impacts another person. Another one is respect confidentiality. What we learn here leaves here. What we say here stays here. And finally, be curious and respectful. Be a mindful listener and do not blame or shame. Now, these have been adapted from GLSEN's guidelines for respectful GSA spaces. We have the link and we'll put that in the chat for you. But right now I am so thrilled to move on to the next slide and the introductions for Carly Lucius, MSW, and Dr. Margaret Sullivan, PhD. I will introduce them and then hand the mics over to them. So As a recent Master of Social Work graduate from Florida State University, Carly Lucius's interests, in child welfare, trauma, grief, and research led her to her current work with the Stoops Center for Communities, Families, and Children, the CFC Center. Ms. Lucius is employed at the CFC Center as a program associate and community outreach specialist. Ms. Lucius leads the team in outreach efforts on their ROTARC project, where the CFC Center functions as the Southeast Rural Opioid Technical Assistance Regional Center, serving Region 4 ROTARC. Okay, Ms. Lucius conducts outreach to ensure all community members, librarians, direct service providers, and other key stakeholders are aware of and participate in the free services offered through the ROTARC. And next, Dr. Margaret Sullivan is an assistant professor in the School of Information at Florida State University. She completed a doctorate in library and information science from the University of South Carolina. She also has a master's in information systems and a master's in library science from Drexel University. Her research areas of interest focus on the health-seeking behaviors and patterns of disadvantaged populations, with a focus on the opioid use population. Dr. Sullivan studies the impact that information access, information literacy, health literacy, and reading and literacy has had in affecting the health and well-being of the people that she studies. She also studies, publishes on, and advocates for the universal human right to credible health information. I am so excited to pass 2 microphones to these 2 people. Take it away. I will turn off my screen and mute myself. Thank you, Carly and Dr. Sullivan.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that beautiful introduction. I apologize that our center name is very long, so it's quite the mouthful. But thank you all for being here. We're going to be going over our presentation, Combating the Opioid Epidemic, One Rural Librarian at a Time, which is an overview of the Opioid Toolkit developed for the ROTA-RC project. I'll get a little bit more into what our project is here in a few minutes. But again, my name is Carly, and I'm here with Dr. Sullivan to present to you all today.
Hi, I'm Margaret Sullivan. I'll introduce myself quickly as well. It's important to me actually that you know first that I was a school librarian. So I come from the background of being first an elementary school librarian, and then after that, a high school librarian. And then after that, I went to get a PhD that focused specifically on, well, a library and information science, but my research area is really about how people who are disadvantaged look for health information, particularly when things are stacked against them. So for example, right now I'm writing up the results of a study that I wrote where I went to Kensington, the epicenter of the opioid epidemic in Philadelphia, actually, which is the area that I'm from. I'm from New Jersey originally. And I went and surveyed 102 people who were on the streets actively using opioids and asked them about how they get information for harm reduction and how they use public libraries as resources. So this is exactly what I do and exactly what I care about. It means a tremendous amount to me, as does librarianship. So with that, let me say this is what we're doing today. Okay, first, Carly is going to tell you about that thing with a really long name. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how the opioid epidemic is affecting libraries and the role of libraries potentially in the opioid epidemic. We'll talk about the OCLC toolkit, how that came to be, and then the specific steps within the toolkit. And then, of course, we'll see if you have any questions or anything that you would like to touch base with at the end. Okay, so from there, Carly.
Yes, so this presentation was developed in part of our Southeast Rural Opioid Technical Assistance Regional Center grant as an effort to disseminate information to library staff and directors on the opioid epidemic and how it affects them locally, on a local level. And so that's basically what we do as a center across the Southeast region. We develop and disseminate information that is all stored on our website that you can visit there at that QR code that anyone in our region or outside of our region can access for free. So I won't go into this too much because I know we don't have a lot of time to get through all the content, but there is a brief overview of some of the resources that we offer there on our website. And again, all of it is free and open source. So please go ahead and check it out. I am also going to drop a link in our chat. It's for an anonymous survey that we provide at all of the presentations that we do through the Rhoda Center. And it just allows us to get anonymous feedback and gives us an opportunity to hear back from people on how we can better these presentations. And I'll talk a little bit about how that is different from the NNLM survey towards the end of our presentation, but we would super appreciate your feedback today as well.
Everybody loves a survey. It really is helpful for us to get data on how to be more effective, which is what we want to do. That's what we're doing here. This is something that is tremendously close to my heart, the opioid epidemic. And helping these people is something I think is really important. And I know that it is also a high priority population for NIH and all of those organizations. I also know that this works really well in concert with the Public Libraries Initiative that the National Networks of Libraries of Medicine, talk about a long name I've never been able to say properly for some reason, but that the NNLM is concerned with. And there's a reason for that. So, you know, I don't know if you know where libraries came from. I'm going to touch on that first, okay? So back between 1886 and 1919, the philanthropist Andrew Carnegie donated $55 million to create, at that time, 1,689 libraries in the United States. Many of those libraries are still present today. And what he did was he essentially spent $1.6 billion in today's money to create almost 1,700 libraries across the United States, with the belief that it's important to have a free, equal public space in communities, a space for people to read and learn, a space for people to gather, and a space that's not political or partisan in any way, right? And, you know, this idea, which it's kind of funny to think of how that would go today if some philanthropist was like, hey, I'm going to put some sort of civic community structure in every town across the United States. I'm going to build all these buildings for the public. Could you imagine the wars that would happen over that? The amount of confrontation. But fortunately, it wasn't the world of 2024. It was the world of, 1919. And since then, libraries have moved all across the United States, have been built to where there are now 17,454 libraries in the United States. To contextualize what that number means, okay? And I think this is like the most interesting thing that you'll probably hear today. There are more libraries in the United States than McDonald's. There are more libraries in the United States than Starbucks, okay? To me, that I find that kind of mind-blowing personally. And there's a reason for that. They're highly trusted institutions, viewed by over 90% of Americans as vital to the community. So there are 1.4 billion visits to libraries per year. That means that every minute, 2,664 people visit the library. To once again contextualize those kinds of numbers, and I'll be happy to answer questions at the end. I would actually love to, but I will have to wait until the end to do that. I hope you don't mind, Alexis. So to contextualize that, in 2017, more people checked out a book than bought a movie theater ticket. There were 113 million attendees at public library programs in 2016, for example, which is more than all Major League Baseball, National Football League, and National NBA Association games combined. So why does that matter? Okay, there are a lot of them. That's great, right? In addition to that, libraries offer services that are vital to communities, right? And I know that you here at the NNL know that, but just to point out, 76.8% of libraries provide online health resources, okay? And 60%, I would actually think that number is low, but 60% actually offer programs to help Americans identify health insurance resources and get better informed on health topics. 77% of libraries offer online health resources and also offer guidance as to how to use them. So these are already institutions that are trusted, they're ubiquitous, they're all over the place, and they're staffed with typically very community-minded, caring people. I think that's an accurate description of most people who want to work in a public library. They're people that care about their communities, they're people that want to make a difference. And they're people that are electing to work in these really amazing last public free spaces that we have. So in order to leverage this, the OCLC, and I'm sure you're all familiar with the OCLC, but it stands for the Online Computer Learning Center. The OCLC is the purveyor of WorldCat and other online databases and aggregators of databases. So the OCLC is huge and decided to start studying how public libraries were responding to the opioid crisis. And why would they do that? Well, the fact is that we have seen a really, really sharp increase in people who are homeless, people who have mental health issues, and people who suffer from opioid use disorder go into libraries, wanting to use those spaces in the way that many other people do. You know, in addition to being places that are free and open, they're also places that are climate controlled and have services. So understanding that this population is already going to public libraries, the OCLC decided to look for case studies around the United States to find out how that response was going. And in doing this, they came up with different data points for where people with opioid use disorder were going into libraries, how they were using them, and how these responses were happening in such a way that they were able to produce suggestions for a data-driven response. What does that mean? Well, looking at the way that public libraries are already dealing with the opioid crisis, what's working and what's not, and what does the data say? So in doing this, the OCLC produced, oh my goodness, I think there's a mistake, I'm so sorry. The OCLC produced a call to action, public libraries and the opioid crisis. Now, this call to action has a set of 5 action steps that I'll be going over later in the presentation. Sorry about that. In order to respond in public libraries to events with people coming in who are on opioids or coming in to get information about the opioid crisis and what public librarians can do. But before I go over that, I want to give a brief overview on opioids and opioid addiction and just kind of explain like what happens to people and what happens to their brain, where this came from. All right, so in brief, you know, in the 1970s and the 1980s, pharmaceuticals began to very aggressively market opioid prescriptions, including drugs like Oxycontin and hydrocodone, despite evidence that they were very highly addictive. They marketed them as non-addictive pain relief, and they tended to target poorer blue-collar communities in areas where people did jobs like coal mining. And they had a lot of issues with pain that could decrease their potential to earn wages throughout their lives. So, you know, as these drugs were new and people didn't really understand them, they also didn't necessarily understand at first how they affected their brain. So to try to understand why opioids are so addictive, the drugs work in varied ways, but essentially what happens is that our body responds naturally to pain with endorphins, right? When you take an opioid, however, the drug responds to the body's pain in a way that is actually more effective and is also much more binding to our opioid receptors than our own natural endorphins. In addition to that, opioids suppress a chemical called noradrenaline. It's also called norepinephrine, and that controls the functioning of other processes in our body, including blood pressure, digestion, wakefulness, respiration, and things like that. So that's why people can stop breathing when they take too many opioids, because the noradrenaline gets suppressed so much that they stop breathing, which is called an overdose, right? Other things happen as well, but just to put it simply. Simultaneously, opioids can release dopamine, which creates a high. So the problem is that the body becomes used to that overly effective response, and its own endorphins can no longer do the job. And that's called tolerance, right? Simultaneously, the body produces more noradrenaline to promote the function of the body's respiration, digestion, and blood pressure. But when the body produces more noradrenaline, now it also needs more opioids to maintain that balance. Okay, so if a person suddenly stops taking opioids, all of a sudden they have way too much noradrenaline in their body. And what that does, it's not fatal, but it causes their respiration, their blood pressure, all of these things to just skyrocket. It causes them to feel really violently ill. And they can feel violently ill for days or even weeks. So that's what withdrawal is. It's a set of really awful side effects that are so bad that people often go to hospitals because they feel so sick. And after a while, a person's tolerance gets so high as well that the opioids no longer are able to release enough dopamine to get high. At this point, the person has this opioid addiction, and they're taking the drugs not just to get high, but just to feel normal and also to avoid withdrawal. On a side note, it's often after experiencing a period of sobriety and then relapsing that people overdose, because their tolerance goes down and their body's no longer used to taking such a high dose. They take that high dose and they end up overdosing. So who will become addicted? Oops, lost my mouse. The truth is anybody who takes enough opioids will become addicted, because that's how the brain works, okay? Genetic factors play a major effect. People who have parents or older family members who abuse opioids are more likely to become addicted as well. The earlier a person begins to use drugs, the more likely they are to progress to more serious abuse. I mention this because many of the cases that we hear about are children, 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, who get into their parents' medicine cabinet and they go and they experiment with their opioids. And because they're so much younger, they're so much more susceptible to those genetic reactions, or excuse me, those brain reactions that I was talking about before. Their brain becomes much more dependent quicker, and their ability to get sober is greatly reduced. The method of administration as well, if somebody smokes a drug versus injects it, has a lot to do with its addictive potential. And then again, some people will never develop diabetes. This is just like that. Anybody who does it will eventually get addicted. Some people don't develop diabetes because they don't go over a certain weight, much like some people will not become drug dependent because they'll never try drugs. In both cases, they would. The way that these drugs work, if you do enough of them, you will become addicted. Carly?
So we just wanted to open up for very brief discussion, because I know we don't want to take up too much of our presentation time, but does anyone want to share maybe one thing that they learned about opioids and how people who use opioids potentially can become addicted that you may not have known about before? You could even drop it in the chat if you'd like.
Yeah, what's one thing that you heard that was new to you?
Okay. Well, we can go to our next slide here.
Okay. One moment. Oh, one moment. I believe Gail in the chat might have had something to add.
That everyone could
Everybody
become
comes-
addicted eventually, and that genetics plays such a big role. Yeah,
Unfortunately.
definitely. Influence, environmental influence too, is really key. when it comes to like that genetic factor, but there are individuals who are just more prone to it as well.
Yeah, the earlier you become exposed, the more likely you are to become addicted. Holly, something I do like to mention, it's something that I read in a newspaper article, and it talked about how if you're reading this article, something you should do is go get a medication safe. If you have children. So I have children. My oldest is only 9 though, right? But the first thing that I did when I read that was think, gosh, you know, I don't know if he's going to choose to experiment when he's 10 or 12 or 14 or 17, and I don't really want to find out the wrong way. So one thing I like to advise people is you can go on Amazon, and for about $20, you can buy a clear box that has a safe component to it, and you can keep your medication in it. All right.
So yeah, some practical information just for you all to have in your back pocket as we talk about this really tricky subject. Are signs of an overdose. It's always good to have this information at hand. I'm also going to drop a link in the chat to our PDF library. We have flyers and pocket guides that you can actually keep on you. That way you don't have to remember this information all the time. But opioid overdose signs are really, really important to be able to notice in someone. But the number one thing to do, even if you suspect that someone is experiencing an overdose, is to call 911. They are really the experts in this situation, and it provides people a lot of relief to know that they are not having complete autonomy over how the situation goes down. 911 is your backup that's going to be on the way if you even suspect that someone could be experiencing an overdose. But the signs to look for include that a person's face may be extremely pale, or they feel clammy to the touch. Their body could go limp. Their fingernails or lips are purple or blue. They may make gurgling noises or start vomiting. They can't be awakened, or they're unable to speak if they do seem awake, or their breathing or heartbeat slows or stops. So just some practical information. Again, I encourage you to explore our website, our PDF library, and our courses. We do have a, that's okay. We do have a Narcan course that walks you through what to do in an overdose situation. So we have a lot of resources that can help you kind of navigate understanding how to respond in that situation too.
So again, this was originally created by the OCLC, but the Opioid Toolkit goes through the following steps. First, it talks about exploring your community data. We're going to talk about considering different community assets and how to collaborate with different partners in the community, increasing awareness of the opioid epidemic amongst your staff and the community. And then finally, like, we're going to talk about focusing on library and staff self-care. And also, the ultimate goal of this is to offer community engagement and programming options. So the eventual progression, we hope, is to try to offer programming options into your community that can be helpful for people who are experiencing any effects of the opioid epidemic. But with that, Carly is going to talk first about exploring your community data.
Yes, thank you. So again, this is step 1 of 5 steps in the opioid toolkit, exploring your community data. So exploring your community data allows you to assess community needs on a local level, which can inform your role in the crisis. It also gives you tools to discuss and advocate with your community leadership and library leadership, along with stakeholders, about how this crisis is affecting your community at a drilled down local level. So in other words, it gives you great talking points to discuss your community specifically. So one way to explore community data is through countyhealthrankings.org. And again, as we mentioned in the chat, these slides will be available to you after the presentation for you to be able to access these websites. We won't go through it right now with volunteers, but I do encourage you to punch in countyhealthrankings.org into your browser and maybe try looking through this as we talk about it. But it can customize by county or zip code. And it is important to note with this website that if you live in a more rural area, it could generalize to an area that's a bit bigger than where you live. So just a caveat with the data here. So if you put in your zip code and use the drop-down tool under health factors, you'll be able to view your local overdose death rates and see your county's data against the national average. But why is that important? Well, when we're talking about looking at community data, it localizes and personalizes it. Large scale data says a lot about the greater population, but not as much about our small communities. And another way to view local data is through your state's local health charts website. So for this example, we'll be using Florida Health Charts for the next few slides, but there are other health charts websites and other websites where you can view health data that would give other examples from across the nation, the region. We're just using these because we're from Florida and we use this as an example. So your health data website will allow you to break down this information locally again, but the data on this slide in particular is very interesting when you consider how close Escambia County and Leon County are here in Florida. So you can see there that their population sizes are pretty similar. And that we are, oh, no, it's okay, go ahead. So every day in Escambia County, 122 people die of an opioid overdose. But then if you compare Leon and Escambia County, which are within 2 square miles in size and 25,000 people in population, the numbers are staggering considering how similar the population size is along with the location. So again, using your local health data website allows you to break down these numbers and be able to talk about the impact that the opioid crisis is having locally in your area. And it also allows you to advocate, knowing the differences between counties who have a similar size to you or maybe a similar population type. It just allows you to localize that data and gives you talking points to be able to advocate.
Thanks, Carly. And then I'm going to talk here about action step 2. So action step 2, the main goal of it is to identify partners to work with and then essentially to target the library's strengths. Okay, so at this point, you've looked through some of that local data and you've said, okay, you know, it might not seem like we have that much of a problem, but when you look at our population compared to other, you know, counties near us or other similar areas, our overdose rates are actually a lot higher. So you can say that to people. Well, if that is true, or well, of course, yeah, wherever you live, what you're going to find is that there are going to be other people who are already doing this work too. So many communities may already have organizations that are addressing these issues. And by identifying these partners, it eliminates duplications of work. It also allows each partner to play to their strength. So basically that idea that nobody can do everything really well, right? It's better to conquer and divide. The public library is a really trusted organization within a community that provides accurate information that's also non-stigmatized and is accessible and has meeting locations as well. Professionals have users experience. Like it's that perfect kind of place, right? Where people can come and get information that's, you know, they trust. Now, health departments are also very natural partners for this kind of work. Health departments can direct librarians to resources they might not be aware of, can introduce them to community programs. They make excellent natural partners to do community programming with because they often already have initiatives for these kinds of community issues and need places to advertise them, need spaces in which to promote them. So they make excellent natural partners. And then some of these directories on here are really helpful. Again, as Carly pointed out, you'll have this available to you later so that you can actually click on these links. But they provide a really excellent higher overview of services to different areas. Some that might not be local necessarily, but might be available in your area. Well, what that means is, given the area that you live in, you may have access to certain state or federal resources, and these can give you information about that as well. So libraries really do have a lot of potential partners to work with. And then, of course, any associations or organizations in your community that specialize in harm reduction or homelessness tend to work quite a bit with the opioid use population. Just so that you know, harm reduction is a term that we use that talks about giving people resources that help with their quality of life, so to speak, or reduces the amount of harm that drugs can cause to them. And what that means, for example, to contextualize that again, is if somebody has an abscess in their hand where they're injecting and they're using drugs, a harm reduction option would be to cure the abscess before seeking sobriety resources with them. Because if you do that first, you're more likely to get them to a place mentally and physically where they can then continue on a healthier path of better choices, right? That would be an example of harm reduction. So harm reduction organizations are excellent community partners, as are health departments. Okay, so moving on from that, I get really excited about this stuff. There are all different kinds of other community partners that can help. These are just some examples. As Carly said, we're kind of deferring to Florida stuff here, but just looking at these examples, I believe in your communities, you also can come up with maybe some things that you've heard of or similar organizations to look for. And there are nonprofits and social workers tend to work a lot in this space as well. Okay, so there are different kinds of collaborations that really help. Sometimes you can find specialized resources that are geared towards a specific population, like young people, multilingual materials. The National Library of Medicine has Medline Plus, which has tons of resources that can be really helpful for reaching out to populations that might have lower literacy levels, for example. You can connect with community assets and partners that provide subject matter experts and can even provide training for library staff and patrons to participate in different programs or events. Another option is to connect with individuals who have actually had experience with opioid addiction, and you can do that with community partners as well. So different things to think about, but just remember that there are many, many resources out there to use. There are also many grant resources that you can apply for as well to do these kinds of collaborations. The National Network of Libraries of Medicine has many different grants that you can apply for different community health initiatives. And then what does the library bring to the table? The library brings a lot. When you're going into these collaborations, things to talk about is this is what we bring. We bring a trusted organization that reaches all kinds of community members, a safe physical space, a non-stigmatized place for people to talk about difficult issues, potential marketing reach, potential resources that we can offer. We can even offer to vet specific topical resources for special occasions. And then a knowledgeable staff and probably an awesome one. If it's librarians, it's usually a really good thing. All right, and then step 3 is all about increasing the awareness and the knowledge of the issue among the staff and the community, okay? So increasing the knowledge and awareness of the issue. This is all about really ending the stigma that surrounds opioid addiction. So your staff, likely because of your exploration of the data and already knowing this is a problem in your community, likely already knows a lot about the opioid epidemic. Making sure that they don't have any stigma or misconceptions is really important, okay? Understanding the amount to which that people are suffering from this is one thing. Also understanding, for example, that a lot of the people who come into opioid addiction come in when they're teenagers. They come in through normal opioid prescriptions that they end up misusing because either they're in pain or they make bad choices, right? just like everybody else has. So trying to get people to understand better. Part of this, though, is also that we use person-first language. Okay. This here is talking about addiction, a dictionary and words matter. These resources here are about something called person-first language that I like to talk about in action step 3 as well. And we talk about stigma, we have to talk about how we talk about people, okay? Do you call that person a person with opioid use disorder? Do you call them a drug addict? Did a drug addict come to the library today? Or did a challenging patron? You know, when we talk about people, the way in which we talk about them really affects the way in which we see them and the way that we transfer that stigma. So one thing that we do talk about in this presentation that I like to point out is talking about somebody who has substance use disorder. Is called people first language. In that case, you're talking about the person who has substance use disorder. You're not talking about a drug addict. Because when you talk about a drug addict, you're talking about a problem, right? But when you talk about a person who has substance use disorder, you're talking about a human being who has an issue. So there are different trainings here as well that talk about how words matter and how language choices can reduce stigma. And then, of course, we also have resources on trauma and informed care in libraries and trainings on mental health and first aid. Harley?
So then when it comes to actually implementing this in the libraries, individuals will kind of come up with a customer service plan or like an actual document that they'll have posted in their library. That's been one way that librarians can kind of implement this idea and create accountability among staff. And these are just some quotes from people who, other libraries who have used this model and really focused on training their staff and making sure that there was accountability among all of their staff. And so one of the quotes includes that the library will offer, or I'm sorry, one of the policies that was developed by Fairview Public Library in New York was that the library will offer the same quality of services to all patrons, regardless of age, race, sex, nationality, educational background, etc. You all have heard statements like this before, but having it actually posted and available for patrons to see and for staff to see can kind of create this guideline that can allow you to advocate for the equal treatment of all patrons and all staff that are a part of the library.
Carly,
yeah.
hi there. I didn't want to interrupt. This is fascinating. We are at about 1:43. Just wanted to let you know, we don't have a ton of questions in the chat yet, but I wanted to give you a couple of, just a little time frame.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have 2 more steps and then we'll finish up. I definitely talked too much. I apologize for that. So I'm going to go over step 4, focus on library staff care. This is a very real issue. So in my research, I talk to public librarians fairly regularly, and a major issue is burnout. So, I hate to provide another like, oh, go take a bubble bath and drink a glass of wine kind of self-care thing, right? I don't think that stuff is really helpful. But it is really important to acknowledge compassion fatigue, which is the emotional residue or strain of exposure to working with those that are suffering from the consequences of traumatic events. It's a little bit different from burnout, but it can coexist. Compassion fatigue is essentially that kind of exhaustion that public librarians can get with the constant caring for their patrons, really. So it's very important that we acknowledge that working with people who are suffering from opioid use disorder can be incredibly stressful and can weigh really heavily on library staff, okay? So it's very necessary to kind of fight that compassion fatigue in library staff. One of the biggest ways to do so is to have a post-crisis plan, okay? So a post-crisis plan is a plan that you would have in place before some sort of traumatic event. Carly mentioned talking about policy or creating some sort of policy in how you deal with difficult patrons or any patrons really. So a post-crisis plan would be something where you know that when something happens in your library, this is what's going to happen afterwards. This is a great place also to leverage those community partnerships as well. So for example, if you have a community partnership with your health department, maybe they have people there that can respond after a traumatic event. Maybe it's as simple as just knowing that that person goes home for the rest of the day, or afterwards they consult their employee assistance program. Because the reality is while I know that we all want to do the best we can and, you know, help people the best way that we possibly can, there's a real cost to your library staff. And it's very, very important to address that. Another option is to have mental health counselor information ready and available for employee support immediately following a crisis. So if we had time to talk about it, which we do not, we would talk about if your library has a post-crisis plan in place. And if your answer to that had been yes, you would have been the second person in all of these presentations to say yes to that. So this is definitely something to think about. Even if you don't have control over establishing a policy in your organization, you can still think about your own needs for clarity and support after dealing with challenging patrons. Okay. And finally, action step 5. The goal of action step 5 is developing programming and training opportunities for library staff and community members. This is kind of the ultimate goal of these steps, right? Is to reach out into the community and see what difference we can make, to have harm reduction resources available, and to know what we're going to do if we need to use them. This is the goal, okay? So these can be low effort informational book displays, right? Not by color this time, but maybe by, you know, addiction issue. High effort, partnering with local organizations to do public awareness campaigns, going out into your community, right? An example of high effort programming, New Orleans Public Library, which is one of the OCLC case study examples, created a staff training in collaboration with the Department of Health to teach CPR, Narcan administration, and stop and spot a bleeding emergency. These are things your library can do if they want to. You know, a big focal point of action step 5. Oh, this is another one as well. Deterra bags. These are medication bags for proper medication disposal. This is something that you can use to drop opioids in or any other kind of medication that you have. This is another option, is giving these out as well. A big focal point of action 5 is finding, distributing, and providing or using naloxone, more often referred to as Narcan. Narcan's a medication that reverses an opioid overdose as it's happening, right? So it's distributed as a nasal spray, which is pictured here, or as an injectable medication. I went to the first library in Philadelphia that trained their entire staff on how to use Narcan and talked to them about that experience. And they decided it was necessary because people were having overdoses in their bathrooms, right? So this is not necessary everywhere necessarily, but this is also an option for places that are seeing a really high rate of these kinds of issues. Personally, I would encourage anybody to learn how to use Narcan because it could be helpful at any time. Carly?
And we do have, again, that overdose pocket guide that you all will have access to on our website. And on the next slide here, we do have a way to access naloxone at no charge or for a low fee. We do have a Narcan locator map on the Rhoda RC website as well, if it's something that you're interested in having stocked up at your library.
Do I have anything to return?
Oh, naloxone offers 2 free doses to public libraries as well. All right.
So we just wanted to mention that the data within the past 5 years is showing a decrease in the amount of opioid prescriptions nationally, yet we're still seeing this ever-growing drug overdose rate within opioids specifically, accounting for the large majority of deaths. So it's very imperative that our communities start addressing these needs at a local level. And we hope that we've given you all some tools to be able to begin that process today. But that is all that we have for you all regarding presentation wise. We do have on our last slide here again that QR code to our survey, which is different from the NLM survey that you all will be receiving. And again, you will receive access to these slides. I did want to mention after this final slide here, if you look at the slides once you receive them, we do have a few really helpful videos. I know we were trying to kind of fit a lot of info into this presentation, but we are here for 10 more minutes for a Q&A. If you all would like to stick around and ask us any questions.
Thank you, Carly and Dr. Sullivan. Excellent information. Wow, I love the data-driven. Thank you. I am going to pass questions and answers, Q&A, over to Daisha. If you see any, I did also, I remember you did put in about that post-crisis plan.
Yes.
So that would be a great question if anyone would like.
That is an excellent question. Well, we can circle back to that excellent question. We do have one, and someone asked, are the 2 free Narcan doses per location or per district?
I was just typing back a response. I think it's per
Ah,
location.
oh, fantastic, fantastic. And since we don't have many more questions, I think it'd be great to circle back to the crisis plan. Would you guys want to elaborate on that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I can kind of talk about it if you'd like, Margaret.
That would be great. Yes.
So the post-crisis plan, there's no one correct way or method or specific plan for a post-crisis plan, right? Because it's so dependent on your staff, how many staff you have, how much support you have, your ability to close a library or keep it open, what have you after a crisis. Obviously, a much bigger library system is not going to have the flexibility of a small, one-person rural library to maybe just close for the day and leave it at that. So it really takes analyzing your staff and the capacity that you have to assist whoever the people are who experience that traumatic event. So like Margaret said, it could be as simple as an agreement among staff that if someone is responding to an overdose situation or another traumatic event, that person goes home for the day and we just kind of keep tabs on them as they're processing through that information in the days following and see when they're ready to come back to work. Or it could be, providing those EAP supports to that person to be able to go and talk to someone about it. But the main thing with a post-crisis plan is that it is a physical plan or protocol that you have available to your staff, the same way that you would a customer service protocol, so that, again, everyone is on the same page. And it's also really helpful to know that it's a flexible plan. Just because it seems like in hindsight that closing the library for one day would work after a crisis occurs, it could be that we need to do something much more deep and helpful for our staff in the aftermath of these situations. So it's really just having something written up, putting some forethought into a situation like that and having some options available to the staff to be able to take care of themselves after a crisis.
Very good. Nice, Carly.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then it looks like we do have another question in the chat here.
So,
We have
Alexis, I just want to answer Alexis's question. So
Go
I'm
right ahead.
actually working on an IMLS grant, which is not this project. And in that, Carly's working with me actually on that. In that, I'm creating ultimately an educational module that I'll give out to library schools, information science schools. I still like saying library. And I'll have it freely available on a website. So if you exchange information with me, I would be more than happy to give you that learning module when it's created, and you can have it and use it and adapt it any way you want. If that's helpful.
Fantastic.
Oh,
Thanks for letting me know.
I wanted to kind of address part of that question too, if you don't mind. We did receive, in a separate presentation that I did kind of on my own, we had a group of people who were asking about the advocacy points, kind of to the second part of your question, like how do you bring this information to a committee? How do you talk about it? So that's something that the Rhoda team is kind of researching, and we're going to work on putting together a 1-page, maybe 2-page flyer on like how to talk about these issues without having to have so much prior knowledge, you know, on the topic, just to be able to have a couple of small advocacy points. So I will take down your email as well. And once we have that 1-page little flyer put together, if you'd be interested in looking over those advocacy points and even just like giving us feedback on it too, if you're like, no, this seems a little bit impractical or what have you. We are, you know, that's how we come up with the information that we make, is through these suggestions and what people need. So to the second point, we are working on trying to figure out how to best make sure that community members know how to advocate for these things too.
Any other
Fantastic.
questions for us?
There don't seem to be any more questions in the chat, but people are definitely going to be following up with you. So this was very rich, a very rich conversation. All right. Well, it doesn't seem as though we have any more questions. People are sharing their contact information with you all. We will capture that information for you as well.
Thank you.
And we're going to turn it back to Sarah.
Thank you for sharing your expertise. Wow, I think we've had a rich conversation. The chat is on fire, and really great, excellent presentation and information. So lots of contact information, and I'm patting myself on the back for such a good job.
Thanks for watching. This video was produced by the network of the National Library of Medicine. Select the circular channel icon to subscribe to our channel, or select a video thumbnail to watch another video from the channel.